We will be talking about all sorts of things this afternoon, but not least the clash between the government and the BMA, the Union of Medical Doctors, which at the moment represents resident doctors, used to be called junior doctors. And they are in a political standoff, not just with the Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, but the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, who's trying to persuade them not to go on strike while flu is spreading at pace across the NHS. So we'll be talking about that this afternoon.
Good day and welcome back to British Report. Imagine, if you will, the scene in Downing Street this morning. Sir Keir Starmer, the man who built his entire persona on being the former Director of Public Prosecutions, the ultimate legal eagle, is sitting down with his morning porridge only to look up at the television and see the BBC, of all people, systematically dismantling his latest grand plan for the nation. It is the political equivalent of a master chef being told by a food critic that he has forgotten how to boil an egg. We are witnessing a monumental moment where the British legal system is being treated like a game of Tetris, and the BBC's chief political correspondent has just exposed the fact that the blocks are falling in all the wrong places. We are talking about the right to a trial by jury, a cornerstone of British liberty since the Magna Carta being tossed into a bureaucratic paper shredder, and the rebellion inside the Labour Party has just gone from a simmer to a full-blown inferno. This isn't just a policy tweak, it is a battle for the soul of British justice, and the Prime Minister is currently losing the argument on live television. Quick favour, if you are loving this fast-paced, sharp-edged look into the chaos currently tearing through Westminster, hit that subscribe button. Over 92% of viewers haven't yet. It's free. Takes a second and means the world to us. Thanks, if you did. Now back to the show, because the details of this legal Starmageddon are enough to make any civil libertarian's hair stand on end. Now, let us get into the absolute meat of this scandal. On BBC Breakfast, Henry Zeffman, a man usually known for his measured tones, delivered what can only be described as a live-to-air obliteration of the government's current trajectory. The news he dropped was a heavy-duty bombshell. Nearly 40 Labour MPs have officially turned their backs on the Prime Minister, signing a letter that essentially tells Keir Starmer to get stuffed over his plans to curb jury trials. This isn't a minor disagreement over a spreadsheet. This is a fundamental no to a proposal that would see thousands of British citizens stripped of their right to be judged by their peers. The government, led by Justice Secretary David Lammy, wants to reserve juries only for the serious stuff, the murders, the rapes, the high-profile horrors. Everything else? Well, if the government gets its way, you could be facing a 3-year prison sentence based solely on the decision of a single judge in a swift court. It sounds less like British justice and more like an automated car park fine system, and the backbenchers are absolutely not having it. The irony here is so thick you could spread it on toast. Keir Starmer, the man who famously defended the rights of the individual as a human rights lawyer, is now the man presiding over a plan to axe the most basic legal right we have. Henry Zeffman pointed out that this rebellion isn't just a few usual suspects making noise. It is a coordinated strike led by people like Carl Turner, the MP for Hull East. Now, Carl Turner isn't just some random backbencher with a grudge. He is a man who knows the law, and he has warned that many more MPs who didn't even sign the letter are privately plotting to bring these proposals down. This is the welfare rebellion all over again, but this time it is about the very fabric of our constitution. When the BBC starts reporting that your own MPs are calling your policy madness, you know the honeymoon period hasn't just ended, it has been hit by a wrecking ball. Let us look at the swift court fantasy being pushed by David Lammy. The Justice Secretary stood up in the Commons and tried to sell this as a modernising silver bullet. He told us that 90% of cases already go through magistrates, so what is the big deal? Well, the big deal, David, is that the remaining 10% represent the cases where a person's life can be utterly ruined. Lammy claims these new judge-led trials will be 20% faster. Great, splendid, but at what cost? If we wanted the legal system to be fast, we could just flip a coin at the police station and save everyone the commute. British justice has never been about speed at the expense of fairness. The government is projecting that the case backlog will hit a staggering 100,000 by 2028, and their solution is to simply remove the inconvenience of 12 ordinary people deciding a verdict. It is the ultimate technocratic move. If the system is broken, don't fix the pipes, just stop the water from flowing. The letter sent to Starmer, signed by the likes of Diane Abbott and other heavyweights of the Labour left, brands the plans as ineffective and a threat to fundamental rights. They pointed out a truth that the Ministry of Justice seems to have accidentally forgotten. The backlog isn't caused by juries. It is caused by empty courtrooms, leaking ceilings, a shortage of judges, and a decade of underfunding. The MPs revealed that while there are 130,000 sitting days available, the government is actually restricting those days by 20,000 a year to save money. So while victims wait years for justice, the government is keeping the doors locked to balance the books, and then blaming the clunky jury system for the delay. It is a level of political gaslighting that would be impressive if it wasn't so dangerous. Henry Zeffman highlighted that this is exactly where the trouble starts for a prime minister, when the logic of the policy is so obviously flawed that even your most loyal supporters start checking their watches and looking for the exit. What makes this obliteration on the BBC so shocking is that it exposes Starmer's biggest weakness, his perceived lack of a moral compass when it comes to the law he once served. The rebel MPs reminded the Prime Minister that even during the Blitz, when London was being turned into rubble, juries continued to sit. They might have been smaller, they might have been huddled in basements, but the principle of trial by jury was considered so sacred it was defended even as the bombs fell. Now in 2025, we are being told that because we have a backlog, we have to abandon 1,000 years of history. We are not at war, the letter screams. It is a powerful, emotional, and legally sound argument that has left Starmer looking like a manager who knows the price of everything and the value of nothing. The BBC's report has essentially pinned the Prime Minister to the wall, asking, "Are you a man of justice or just a man of logistics?" The Swift Court proposal is being framed by the government as a recommendation from Sir Brian Levison, but even that is being questioned. The rebels are arguing that the government is cherry-picking efficiency while ignoring efficacy. If you remove the jury, you remove the common sense check that has prevented countless miscarriages of justice. Juries aren't perfect, but they are a shield against the state. By removing that shield for cases with a likely sentence of 3 years or less, the government is effectively saying that if your life is only being ruined a little bit, you don't deserve the full protection of the law. It is a staggering hierarchy of justice that has left legal professionals and backbenchers alike in a state of absolute disbelief. Henry Zeffman made it clear that while the government might think they can bully this through, the growing number of colleagues who are not prepared to support these proposals suggests that a massive U-turn is the only thing currently in the swift lane. Let us transition to the wider political fallout, because this isn't happening in a vacuum. This jury rebellion is taking place against a backdrop of a migrant crisis that is out of control and an NHS that is currently on life support. Starmer's smash the gangs policy is being laughed at by the smugglers, and his waiting list promises are being swallowed by the winter flu crisis. When a prime minister loses the argument on his home turf, the law, it sends a signal of profound weakness to the entire country. The BBC journalist didn't just report on a letter, he reported on the beginning of the end of the Starmer honeymoon. The 39ers, as they are being called, have realised that the Prime Minister's majority is a mile wide but an inch deep. If they can force him to blink on jury trials, they can force him to blink on anything. The role of the BBC in this cannot be understated. For a correspondent like Zeffman to use such stark language on a flagship morning programme indicates that the Westminster bubble has already decided that Starmer is in trouble. When the national broadcaster starts drawing parallels between current policy and the disastrous welfare rebellions of the past, it creates a narrative of failure that is very hard to escape. Zeffman's analysis was sharp. He noted that while the government claims they aren't worried, they should be very worried about the growth of this dissent. This is how the rot sets in. It starts with 40 MPs, then it moves to 60, and before you know it, the Prime Minister is having to rely on the opposition to pass his own laws. It is a humiliating position for a man who only months ago was being heralded as the King of the North with an unshakable mandate. The Justice Secretary, David Lammy, tried to defend the plan by stating that only 3% of cases go before a jury anyway. But that is like saying only 3% of people ever use an emergency exit, so we might as well bolt them all shut. The jury is the emergency exit of the British legal system. It is the final safeguard against a state that might be overzealous, prejudiced, or simply wrong. By dismissing this as a small percentage, Lammy has shown a staggering level of tone deafness that has only served to fuel the rebellion. The MPs in their letter correctly identified that this erosion of a fundamental right is an ineffective way of dealing with a crisis caused by administrative incompetence. They have suggested alternatives, such as actually using the 20,000 sitting days they have cut, but the government seems more interested in radical headlines than credible solutions. As we wrap our heads around this BBC obliteration, the question becomes, what happens next? Starmer is facing a choice between a humiliating U-turn or a bruising Commons battle that he might actually lose. If he doubles down, he risks a total fracture in the Labour Party. If he retreats, he looks like a leader who can be bullied by his own backbenchers. It is a Starmageddon scenario of his own making. The BBC has left the country shocked by exposing just how thin the Prime Minister's authority truly is. We are seeing a government that talks about fixing the foundations while simultaneously taking an axe to the very bedrock of our freedoms. The right to a jury isn't a privilege to be handed out by David Lammy when the backlog is low. It is a right that belongs to every citizen, regardless of how clunky the Ministry of Justice finds it. The historical weight of this moment is truly profound. For 800 years, the idea of being judged by one's peers has been the defining characteristic of the English legal system. It has survived kings, queens, world wars, and economic collapses. Now it is being threatened by a swift court initiative because a few technocrats want to make a chart look better. The BBC journalist's report has served as a wake-up call to the nation. Your rights are being traded for efficiency, and your Prime Minister is the one holding the ledger. The rebellion led by Carl Turner and Diane Abbott is a rare moment of principle in a town usually obsessed with optics, and it has left the government looking morally bankrupt and legally illiterate. In conclusion, Keir Starmer has a massive problem on his hands. He is a lawyer who has lost the support of the lawyers, a leader who is being defied by his followers, and a Prime Minister who is being obliterated by the very media he hoped would be his ally. The 39ers have laid down the gauntlet, and the BBC has made sure the entire country was watching when they did it. This isn't just a bad day at the office for Starmer, it is a fundamental crisis of credibility. As the case loads head toward that terrifying 100,000 mark, the public will remember that the government's first instinct wasn't to fund the courts, but to fire the jury. It is a move that will haunt this administration for years to come. Thank you so much for watching.